Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority Executive Director and CEO Greg Slater has spent most of his leadership career in government roles. And in those roles, he has made big and small decisions that impact large budgets and large swaths of people, and, of course, roads and highways. The Business Observer, both in print and online, writes regularly about leaders like Greg and how government intersects with business. To read those stories and more, subscribe to the Business Observer. Go to businessobserverfl.com to sign up. Hello and welcome to the Business Observer's From the Corner Office podcast. I'm Mark Gordon, managing editor of the Business Observer. Today's guest is Greg Slater, executive director and CEO of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. Greg, thanks for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Really great to be here.
Excellent. We're going to talk about your career. We're going to talk about leadership. And before we get into that, we're going to do 3 rapid fire questions. I always ask the guests, are you ready? But you have to be ready because you're already on. So you're
always ready.
You're always ready. So normally one of these questions I ask is, what is the longest plane ride you have been on? Because I'm just fascinated by long plane rides. But given your title and career, I'm going to tweak it. What's the longest car ride, Greg, you have ever, total trip, not total out, like have you driven to California, have you driven cross country? What's your longest car ride?
It's funny that I'll throw it back to a second. Are you talking time or distance? Because there's 2 different kind of questions.
I guess I want both. Give me time first.
So time first was probably the longest car ride I ever had to do was from Baltimore to DC with a significant amount of transportation disruption, crashes, every bit of the special events in DC. It was one of those kind of 30-mile, like 4 or 5 hour, 6 hour, 30-mile trips, which
the Beltway at its finest.
Yes. And then distance, really, I haven't driven a whole lot of distances. One of the things that I'm finding in Florida is I completely underestimated how big of a state Florida is. And so, when I was working in Maryland, I could drive end to end of Maryland in probably 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours. Florida, it takes me a good 4 hours to get to Tallahassee. And so, but I think the longest drive here I've had in Florida is my daughter was going to school and doing some work study work. And in Key West, she was studying marine biology. And I had to drive down there and pick her up. And so it was kind of the drive all the way through the Keys and the drive all the way back.
Yes. Yeah, quite. Florida is very long, and you can get into the Panhandle, and then it just keeps going and going. Even west of Tallahassee, there's quite more of Florida left. Okay, next question. What is one food or drink you would take with you to a deserted island?
Oh, depends on how long I've been on that deserted island, but I'm a sucker for a good pizza.
Pizza, I like it. Excellent. All right, and last question. What are the 2 most used apps on your phone?
Well, unfortunately, it's Amazon is where I start because it's just so convenient.
Yes.
That if I need something, I get it. But lately, number 2, is ChatGPT. I'm using it for so much I'm using it so much in my personal life that it's like too powerful for me.
Give us an example of a recent, just kind of one-off personal life thing you use with ChatGPT.
Absolutely. My wife and I are in the market for a house.
Yeah.
Right? So, the market is all over the place a little bit right now. We were really competitive for a while, and then the market got inflated. I went and looked at a house the other day, and I felt like, the price was a little bit high. I asked ChatGPT, what's the fair market value for this house? Gave it the address. ChatGPT ran comps for me and laid it all out.
Wow. And what were the response? Did it say overvalued?
That they were priced on the high end of the range.
Yeah.
And if I could get it for X price, then it would be a good value.
Interesting. All right, ChatGPT, I like it. That's a good tip. Okay, Greg, we're going to get into your career. Start with what you're doing now at the Hillsborough Expressway Authority, the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. What is your role there, and what are your goals and mission there?
First, let me tell you a little bit about what we are. So we're the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. We are an independent special district of the state. And so we were created to bring transportation solutions to the market faster than what you could using the traditional kind of funding methods. So our base is the Leroy Selman Expressway. So we use the Leroy Selman Expressway, formerly the Crosstown, to generate toll revenue to invest in transportation and mobility solutions in the Tampa Bay region. So we have authority for expressways. We also have authority for transportation solutions, transportation technology, even transit facilities. And so what we do is we generate that revenue off the Leroy Selman Expressway. We're about 130, next year, 138, $139 million revenue profile. We're an organization of 27 to 30 people. So we're the biggest small business in town. And we invest 100% of that back into the transportation system. We have the Leroy Selman Expressway. We have some local roadways, Meridian Avenue, Brandon Parkway. We have the Leroy Selman Greenway. We're building a local east-west connection for the city now as part of our next 6-year work program.
Excellent. And your career has been in transportation. Give us an overview. I know you're with the Maryland Department of Transportation for quite a bit of time. Give us an overview of your career.
Absolutely. I've been doing this for about 3 decades now. I had to do that update of your bio from 2 decades to approaching 3 decades. I'm a kid from Baltimore. After I graduated from college, I took a job in Baltimore City working. Really, they were trying to map a lot of their utility infrastructure. And so I spent about a year mapping utility infrastructure, which generated this kind of fascination I have with systems and how they all kind of interact together. And frankly, transportation was more exciting than sewer. And so I took a job. In the DOT. At that time, it was an organization called the State Highway Administration, Maryland State Highway Administration, to integrate that same technology into their operations. And at that time, and where I started was in the survey section. So at that time, it was like the emergence of aerial photography, LiDAR solutions, GIS technology, all of the mapping technology that is really kind of commonplace for us today. So integrated a lot of that into the Highway Administration, then took a job in the same organization in charge of all the engineering technology. So it was really about taking those systems across our project delivery programs in the Office of Highway Development. Then I had my first promotion into, really what is the senior management level, where I was the director of planning and preliminary engineering. And so that was in the early 2000s. So, one of the first big jobs I had to do was rebuild a $4 billion program on the heels of the recession that we saw in the 2000s. And really, it kind of taught me, one, how you stretch those dollars, how you invest in technology, how do you kind of get more return on your investment. And then, I like to think of my career as a little bit of luck and a little bit of just kind of working, not being afraid to do things that others were not doing. Then from there, I was in that position for probably about 6 or 7 years after that. And then, what happened in the federal government on the heels of that was the federal government passed a lot of performance-based planning regulations, a lot of data-driven work that really drove me into kind of a national leadership presence in a lot of what we were doing. From there, I moved into the deputy administrator role, really overseeing all project development, so planning, capital programming, highway design and delivery of the projects, our bridge program, real estate program, all the environmental programming, National Environmental Policy Act delivery, those types of things. And then from there, I took on the role as the state highway administrator. So that was really my first CEO job, working on, so at that point I had a budget of about $4.5 billion, organization of about 3,000 or 4,000 people, kind of operations, kind of top to bottom, responsible for every roadway in the state of Maryland that didn't have a toll on it. So interstate system, I was tasked with, really, at that time, it was the largest construction program in the history of the state, about $2 billion in active construction. and a governor who wanted to eliminate a whole list of structure deficient bridges. So really, really big task. Did that for a few years. Then got a call from the governor's office one day and asked me if I would take on the role as Secretary of Transportation for the state of Maryland. And that's a unique position in Maryland because they're mirrored after US DOT. So in that role, I was not only responsible for the highway system and the tollway system, I was responsible for the public transportation. So rail service between Baltimore and DC, a light rail system, a metro system, Baltimore City's bus system. I had the Port of Baltimore under my portfolio, BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport. I had, and really what the Florida Tax Collector's Office does today, Motor Vehicle Administration. So I had all of that under my portfolio, $16 billion budget, 14,000 employees. Took that job on. I was the first one to take that role that had ever come up from within the organization. So you go through that whole process of kind of onboarding, Senate confirmation, 90 days in, a global pandemic hit. And so then you're in this mode of, all right, how do I deliver this program? How do we make progress? And how do we work this workforce in a very different environment than we were dealing with 3 months ago?
Yeah, all right, and we're going to get into leadership, some questions on that. But you mentioned something I want to take a step back. Kid from Baltimore, so I'm gonna throw you a curveball here, pun intended. Rays or Orioles?
Orioles all day.
Orioles all day. Ravens or Buccaneers?
Oh, Ravens. It's funny. My allegiance will never move from Orioles or Ravens. But what I've really leaned in here in Tampa is the Tampa Bay Lightning with hockey, because I'll say this will probably get me in trouble. No good Baltimore kid will ever root for a DC team. So I
understand that. Yes, I get it. And the Lightning are certainly a fun team to watch. Right. But you said something else. Going back to leadership, you said something really interesting in that a little bit of luck and then taking on roles that other people didn't, or putting yourself out. Tell us about that sort of philosophy you have about growing in your career in leadership.
I am just a student. I've always been a student of just about everything, very curious, always learning. And in my career, there have been times where someone will come to me and say, hey, we're trying to do this. Would you be willing to take it on? And I've never been afraid of saying, yeah, I'll give it a shot and try and take on a new role or a new responsibility or a new big effort, a program or a project. I've always thought a little bit differently. And, I spoke to some student groups years ago about this. You grow up, I'll date myself, but I'm in my mid 50s now. And so, I'm a kid that grew up, in the 70s, high school in the 80s. And the education system, was really designed at that point where there was you kind of mold, right? You either had to fit a certain mold. And if you didn't, you struggled. And I was just not a great student. But what I learned in college and what I learned when I got out into my professional career was I thought differently. And what was challenging me as a student in my younger days, because I was thinking differently, was my greatest asset when I got into college and my greatest asset when I got into the workforce. I was working for leaders that were looking for people that were thinking differently. And you combine that with not being afraid to kind of take on new things and not being afraid to fail at them. It really opened up a ton of opportunities for me where my career path could have gone 6 or 7 different directions because I had worked on so many different things.
Yeah. And the other thing is interesting too. So as you talked about it, right? You grew up, or you grew into this leadership role, and then you get this big role, kind of this career. I don't know if it's career pinnacle, because this could be your current job too. You're still working. You're not at the pasture yet, but you get this, head of transportation for the, Department of Transportation, state of Maryland. How do you attack that job? Like, not even thinking about COVID. How do you go into a role so big with such a big budget and so many people? I'm sure obviously you have senior reports, but what was your mindset in taking on such a big leadership role?
The mindset was, a few different areas. One is what do I know and what do I don't know? It would have been really easy to go into, okay, where are you comfortable and focus there. But learning things along the way, and you remember we all learned so much during the pandemic. The first days it was just such an unknown that everybody was trying to figure things out, and the first thing I needed to do was really work on where the team was. From a leadership standpoint, where are our strengths? Where do we need to grow? What is my mindset? How do I communicate that to the rest of our team? What is the direction that we want to go? How do I set that destination for the team? But also, how do I set up the right communication mechanisms? The relationships, what relationships do I have already developed in and out of the organization? What are the relationships that I need to develop and make sure I cultivate? What are the checkpoints that we need to have? And what support system do I need to have around me to be successful? It's just, it's like a game of 3D chess, right? You're trying to think about all of these things at the same time. But at the same time, whether you're delivering something big or whether you're trying to keep the big ship rolling, you have a large workforce that is looking for you for that steady hand, looking for you for that direction, looking for you for that support. So you really have to sit down, take the time to understand where they are, set that direction, and then move forward, because it's a roller coaster.
Yeah, 100%. What, in terms of leadership, I should say, who have been some of your mentors, and what are some key leadership lessons, leadership advice you have learned from your mentors?
I've had so many. I would say many of them probably don't even realize what they mean to me and what I've learned from them over the course of my career. I've had, just this honor and privilege of working with some of the finest professionals in our business. And that's when I say it's a little bit of luck, right? My first senior management job in the recession, I was working for a guy named Neil Peterson, who went on to be the executive director of the Transportation Research Board for the National Academy of Sciences, and a guy named John Picari, who went on to be the deputy secretary of transportation for the US DOT. Just really, really strong guys. And then I went on and I was working for, Beverly Swaim Staley, who was my boss at one point, went on to do the redevelopment of Union Station in the middle of DC. Melinda Peters, Doug Simmons, Greg Johnson, who was the chief engineer for Michigan DOT, came down. I worked for him for a little while. All of those people were just amazing, unbelievable technical depth that took the time to kind of teach me. When I was the SHA administrator, I worked for a guy named Pete Ron. Pete had been the Secretary of Transportation in 3 different states. And Pete was one of these guys that challenged the status quo like nobody I've ever worked for before, but would support you as you were doing it, right? Like he was the guy out front. And all of them are amazing people and amazing professionals that I still reach out to today when I have challenges. And they probably don't even realize it. And then, in Tampa here, I've got an amazing board chair, a guy named Vince Cassidy, who challenges me every day to do more in this community, but also supports me in that journey at the same time. But the mentor that I lean on the most is probably my wife of 30 years, who is more of a mentor to me than she realizes. And she balances me. She's a counselor by profession, so she deals with the roller coaster for me and supports me. But frankly, today, I'm probably doing more mentoring today than I am getting mentored. And that role I'm finding has just such an amazing reward. Just being able to invest in that next generation of public servant. It's just really important to me and become a real passion of mine.
Excellent. That's great. And, speaking of like next generation, you've obviously worked with a lot of different generations, but over your career, you've had to promote people and move people to positions. What do you look for when you're moving somebody up? What are the leadership characteristics that stand out to you that, you're looking for in somebody?
Really, really great question. On top of, do they have the experience and the technical ability to do the job? Do they, what I look for is, do they have the ability to solve problems? Do they have a track record of solving problems, challenges? I look for skills in communication. I look for skills in collaboration. I look for the ability to think differently and work with like multidisciplinary teams. I'm looking for emotional intelligence. And, frankly, whether it depends on the role, right? If you're looking to be a member of a management team, for instance, I need you to be that force multiplier. And so what I mean there is, the difference between someone who's really strong and a real force in what they do, they're driven professionals. That force multiplier is somebody who is going to make everyone else around them better. They care about the strategic goals of the organization, but they care about your goals as much as they care about your own goals. So that person who's going to reach out and say, all right, maybe I'm just in charge of communications or I'm just in charge of finance, but it's equally important to me that you're working well in construction or you're working well in project delivery. That force multiplier, that separator is what I look for in the management and senior management role, because that's just critical for success.
Interesting. Force multiplier. I like that. Another side of management, it's really management, but it's really everyday life. You talk about resilience, right? That word is used a lot about, bouncing back. As a leader, when things aren't going your way or just not happening in the way that you expected it to, and certainly transportation has a lot of, we use the word roller coaster, a lot of ups and downs and projects and budgeting and all those kinds of things. How do you deal with setbacks, with things that didn't go your way as a leader? How have you dealt with that?
You learn more from the setbacks than you do the wins. You just have to be willing to put yourself in the mindset to learn from them as you're going through them. In our business, we greatly impact people's lives. And in some cases, it's life and death. And so, you think about the amount of people that are killed on the transportation system every year. Really what we do really, really matters. And so because of that, I try really hard to be a student of our industry and learn from those setbacks. So that way I can learn from my own setbacks, but also learn from the other ones that are happening in our industry. There are two big things that really kind of stick with me over the years, from team setbacks to big project setbacks is, I made mistakes early in my career thinking that what I saw or where my thought process was what others were thinking and what they saw. And so sometimes you see things that others don't. And I had a mentor really open that up for me, that I was seeing things that others didn't. The only way to ensure that you're really on the right path, because that does give you a setback. You end up in a different place than the rest of your team. The only way to make sure you're on that right path is to really take the time to sit back, explain where you are, explain what your thought process is, figure out where they are and what their thought process is, and work to understand that so that you can have that success and not have that setback through the process. And then really the second thing, Mark, is I've come to the conclusion over the years and the theory over the years that, in any big or meaningful event or any big or meaningful project, I've learned that there will be 3 or 4 moments and sometimes more that your team will come to your door with the mindset that we can't do something, or they've got an insurmountable challenge. You can either be frustrated, or you can just say, okay, we tried, or you can sit them down and work to understand in detail what that challenge is and forge a path to just keep moving forward. The path from start to finish isn't always ever a straight line. And so the problem is that you go into every process thinking it's a straight line with a straight line mindset. So you've got to really take those challenges and expect those challenges. Never, ever accept something you didn't expect. So you have to kind of work through that and figure out the path to just keep moving, because the next milestone is what's important.
Just keep moving from the transportation guy. I love it. One last question, Greg. We're in the throes of summer here. Give us one big thing, or maybe 1 or 2 things that the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority has coming up. What can we look for from you guys the rest of 2025?
We have so many big things coming. We've just gotten approved, $750 million 6-year work program that's got 690 plus million of it is construction. And so when you think about where we are in terms of what we're trying to achieve, we've got to keep up with the growth that we're seeing here in Florida. But on top of the changing dynamics in the region and the city that we're seeing, it's not just growth, it's completely changing travel patterns. On top of that, much like the interstate system across this country and the high performing system across this country, we've got to reconstruct the meat or the heart of our system with the Leroy Summit Expressway. So we've got to build it focused on where Tampa is headed and not where Tampa has been. And we've got to do it while we have record growth on top of that. So, trying to have a good handle on that and really focus on making that investment is a real goal and a challenge for us. And having a good handle on what that system of the future looks like. And we're really focused on that. We've got connected vehicle technology. We've got more and more electrification of our fleet. We've got to have the right data analytics to be able to take advantage of advancements in AI and how they can help us move our transportation system better. So our goals are really about meeting all those challenges and using that data and tools, but really trying to make an impact in this region is where we're focused. And we're getting ready to hit an era of construction to do it.
Excellent. Greg Slater, Executive Director and CEO of the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority. Thank you so much for joining us on the From the Corner Office podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Business Observer From the Corner Office podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gordon. This podcast was produced by Reed Corley of the Corley Company in Sarasota. To hear more episodes of From the Corner Office podcast, go to businessobserverfl.com.